Someone said, "Oh, have you met Mary yet?" The hairs on my body stood up. My skin went into goosebumps. A chill really went through my body.
I had a sense that something wasn't quite right because the maids and the waiters kept looking around, slightly worried, basically saying, bad things happen here.
My dad told me that he had seen a little girl with long blonde hair coming from my bedroom. He went completely ashen, and I could tell something was very wrong.
You could take a line and you could draw together the comparisons of, you know, while we were arguing, while things were getting worse, the energy in the house kept getting stranger. I hear this bang, bang, bang. Whatever it is, this can't be good. The house was literally alive.
In 1996, I broke up with a girlfriend and moved into the Chelsea Hotel, which is actually a very kind of appropriate place to go when you break up with someone. It is a very old hotel. It's probably one of the oldest in New York City. It's very big. It's one of those buildings that you feel has a lot of history, and you can kind of feel it in the air there. I mean, it was always a home to artists, both successful and struggling, many of them tortured and tormented and kind of on the edge. And it has a history of strange things happening and some of them very disturbing and violent things. Arthur Clarke wrote 2001: Space Odyssey in the hotel. Dylan Thomas was living there when he died. Most notably, Sid Vicious murdered Nancy Spungen, which took place, I guess, in 1978. And I moved to the 8th floor. And there were a lot of very cool people that lived there, very interesting people, very smart and talented people. There was a lesbian pornographer who lived on the floor below me. There was this very tall woman who apparently was a dominatrix for hire, you know, and kind of dressed the part. There was a couple who were these very rail-thin junkies who wore kind of odd goth-like makeup. One of the Ramones was living there at the time as well. I think Dee Dee was living there. A couple of weeks after I'd been there and I started meeting some of the other residents. And I used to hang out with some of these other residents, and when I was introduced to some of these people, they asked me what floor I lived on. I said the 8th floor, and someone said, "Oh, have you met Mary yet?" No, I haven't met Mary. It wasn't just a straightforward, "Oh, you should meet this person." There was something. It was a little bit loaded, like there was a little bit of a smirk or a strange kind of subtext, which I took as it was a very eccentric character, Mary, that I was going to meet, you know. And I figured I'd know Mary when I'd see her because she would be some very distinctive person. But I didn't know this Mary, and I figured maybe I'll meet her at some point and whatever. A month or so after that, and I had been living at the hotel for about 2 months now. It was very late at night, maybe 3, 4 in the morning. And I got in the elevator, took the elevator up to my floor, the 8th floor. I stepped out of the elevator and I noticed the light in the hallway was dimmer than usual. I just noticed that. And then I heard very lightly sobbing of a woman coming from the opposite direction. So I turned around and looked at the end of the hallway. And the hallways are very long at the Chelsea. And all the way at the end was the figure of a woman in the corner kind of hunched over, her head was down. She's crying. There's 2 doors and then a wall, and she was kind of hunched over in the corner between the wall and one of the doorways, and she was like huddled in a very strange way. But I remember she was wearing a very long black dress that looked like something from 100 years ago. Which wasn't really so outrageous at the Chelsea because you could see people wearing just about anything at that place. So that didn't really strike me as so outrageous. She was sobbing, so her shoulders were moving and her posture, it definitely looked like someone who was in a lot of emotional pain. That was very clear, and from the sound she was making. And when I think about the noise she made, it wasn't as if the sound was coming like directly out of her mouth or something. It's almost like the sound was just there. So I asked her if she was okay.
Are you okay?
I just called out, I said, "Are you okay? Do you need any help?" And right after I said that, from behind me, I heard a loud pop. I turned around immediately. The light bulb in the fixture had popped. So that part of the hallway became very dark. And I turned back around, and she was completely gone. Maybe she was about to open the door, or someone opened the door, and maybe I scared her, maybe the light going out scared her. And that was it. So about a week, maybe 10 days later, I was in the bar again and ran into a couple of the people who mentioned this Mary. And I said, "I think I saw the Mary you're talking about." As she was crying. She was outside her room. She was wearing this dress that looked like she was from 100 years ago. This one woman looked at me and said, "Mary was a young woman, was in the Chelsea Hotel in 1912. She was from Buffalo, New York. She had recently gotten married, and her husband and her husband's brother went to England on a boat to claim an inheritance. And she, rather than wait for her husband in Buffalo, decided to surprise him at the dock when the boat returned in New York City. So she traveled from Buffalo to New York. She checked into the Chelsea a few days before the boat was due. Her husband had the misfortune to book passage on the Titanic. Mary was a young woman. She had recently gotten married, and her husband had the misfortune to book passage on the Titanic. And he never made it back to New York. And finally, when it was confirmed that he had been killed in the accident, she went back to the Chelsea Hotel and hung herself in her room. When I heard this, the hairs on my body stood up. My skin went into goosebumps, and it was like a chill really went through my body. I realized that she was obviously standing outside of the room that she was staying in, and to me, I would imagine that it was the last moments of her life, that maybe from the time she heard her husband was dead to the time she got back to the hotel, she was debating what she was going to do or how she was going to go on, if she was going to go on, and was battling with this demon, going back and forth whether or not she should. And maybe the last moments of this battle were there, right outside the door to her room. And then she went inside the room and hung herself right after that. And I had spoken to about 3 or 4 people that had seen Mary, and it was all in that exact spot. I just got really, really kind of creeped out, really scared. It was not what I thought it was. And the fact that I didn't know that it was a ghost the moment I saw it, I think made it even creepier. And I went back to my room that night, but it was it was not a comfortable night. It was a really not a good sleep that night. And I was out of there within a week. Anytime I hear anything about the Titanic, I think of, or the Chelsea Hotel, I think about that unfortunate poor Mary.
I'd never really thought about the paranormal very much because I kind of thought that to think about it was unlucky. I didn't want to let it into my life, thank you very much. I was going to Venice with a friend of mine, and the occasion was this friend of mine, Mrs. Browning, was giving a birthday party for her daughter. So we were going to stay and do sightseeing in Venice and go on gondolas and do all the things that tourists do in Venice. And she had rented a palazzo just off one of the canals. I didn't know anything about the palazzo other than the fact that it had been built by a rich nobleman in the 17th or 18th century who was married to a very beautiful woman. And I thought it looked incredibly ominous and forbidding. And the door was opened by this very ancient butler. I mean, he must have been 90. He looked as though he'd been there since the place was built. And we went in. There was a big interior stone hallway. And there were lots of really rather dreary pictures on the wall. And then the other rooms were all decorated in that kind of decaying Italian Rococo style. And already I had a feeling that everything was a bit strange. We went into the dining room. And the dining room, it looked absolutely ravishing. The chairs were ornate. The table was beautifully set with a wonderful white lace tablecloth, gold goblets on the table, gold cutlery, and lots of silver-wrapped candies on the table. They're sugared almonds, something that Italians love, and they're often served as after-dinner treats. So we were all having a lot of fun and telling jokes and celebrating the young girl's birthday. But I had a sense that something wasn't quite right because the maids were scurrying around in a rather furtive way, I would say, kind of looking, slightly worried. And the butler was shaking his head, and he was saying, male, questo male, basically saying, bad things happen here. And I was looking around and saying, what's wrong? What's his problem? One of the other people said that nobody ever used this room because this was the room that was supposed to be haunted by the woman whose picture was on the wall. This was a very, very beautiful woman, and it was probably 16th or 17th century. She was in an amazing bronze-colored dress, and she had some beautiful jewelry on, but she had a very unhappy expression on her face, and she was staring straight at you. So when you looked at the picture, it's as though her eyes were following you, which is quite a spooky feeling. When I asked who the beautiful woman in the painting was, the butler said that she was the mistress of a man who lived in the palazzo 300 years ago, but he didn't go any further. So we kind of sloughed that off. Because it was the teenager's 18th birthday, everybody was a little dressed up. And it was very, very hot because it was September. And I remember I was wearing gray chiffon pajamas, palazzo pajamas, they're called. And all of a sudden I felt shivering cold at my feet. It was like some kind of cold breath had been blown on my ankles. And I said to somebody, I said, well, it's a freezing cold draft. Everybody said, you must be crazy. You know, it's 85, 90 degrees here, but my feet were freezing, absolutely freezing, like a terrible cold draft coming up my legs. So they said, well, it's probably an air vent, you know, that leads downstairs, down under the water. So I looked down, but there was no air vent, there was nothing there. Well, we all thought this was quite scary. And all of a sudden, the windows, which were kind of lattice-work windows with crisscross lead, flew open. One of the guys went to close it, but he couldn't close it. It was as though there was a force behind that window. And all of a sudden, the windows flew open. One of the guys went to close it, but he couldn't close it. It was as though there was a force that was the other side, behind that window, stopping him from closing the window. And two young maids were there, and they kept on looking at the window and looking around, muttering, cattivo, cattivo, questo palazzo è male, è male. I said, what are you talking about? And they said, this place is haunted. We just felt just a kind of bad feeling in the house. After dinner, we all went into the drawing room. We were kind of scattered around. Some of us were in the drawing room. A couple of us were playing Scrabble. Somebody else was playing cards. And one of the teenagers shouted and said, you've got to come and look at this. So we went into the dining room, and there, on the floor, were all these sweet almonds that were wrapped in silver paper, and they were in the shape of a body lying on the ground. So I said to the butler, "Che cosa c'è?" And he said that was where the woman in the picture, that was where her body was found. So I said, what kind of a joke is this? Who did it? Which one of you teenagers did it? And everybody said they did not do it. They did not do it. And all of a sudden, a massive knife, which had been on the wall, shot through the air and then stuck itself into the wall. And then this huge jardiniere came moving across the floor, incredibly fast, as though it had been thrown. I was terrified. I said, there is no way I am staying another night in this palazzo. The butler was the one who told us that this woman, whose picture was on the walls, had been murdered by her husband, who had accused her of adultery, and that he had stabbed her in the dining room, and she had fallen down where all those little candies had been placed, and that she, her ghost, came back. She didn't want anybody to come into that palazzo. And apparently then there was all sorts of gossip that we heard, that everybody who had lived in that house, who had rented that house, some terrible misfortune had happened to them. Somebody had fallen down the stairs. Somebody had been accidentally shot. There was always misfortune. It was horrifying to hear that. Horrifying. One of the reasons that she was so angry this particular time was that the butler normally told people not to use that dining room. And most of the time, he said they did not use it. It was off limits. She did not want us there. She did not want 12 people laughing and joking and drinking good wine and eating wonderful food, sitting at the dining table while she looked down in a fury. Ooh.
My dad was in the military, and we moved around a lot until I was about 7 years old, and then we settled in Georgia, right on the Alabama border. When we moved there, I didn't really have any friends, and that's an important time to have friends to hang out with, and I didn't have any because I was the new kid in town. I was really lonely. And I would go across the street. There was this big wooded area and this lake. I would try to catch minnows in the stream and entertain myself. I found a stray cat, and I would talk to the cat as if the cat was my friend. And it was really pitiful. I mean, looking back at the time, I guess it was a sad time for me, really, really lonely. But then Nancy came along, and it was so wonderful. I went to the woods, to the lake, again, as usual, after school. And then I heard something. There was a really pretty girl with long hair. She was by herself, and she was walking towards me. And when she got all the way up to the stream, she stopped, and she said, "What you doing?"
Fishing for minnows.
I was shy. I didn't know how to act with another kid my age.
What's your name?
She said her name was Nancy. We hung out that day, and I kept it inside. I didn't want her to know how desperate I was for a friend, but I was so happy. I couldn't believe that I had found somebody in my neighborhood to hang out with, and I didn't want her to go home. This one particular day, I asked her if she wanted to come to my house to have dinner, and she said sure. It was just about dinner time. And we walked in, and I told my mom that I had met a friend, and she was so happy. I said, "Is it okay if she stays for dinner?" And she said, "Sure." And then we went to the dinner table, and everybody was already there, and they were, starting to sit down and serve plates. And so she went and got another chair from the dining room and pulled it up to the table for Nancy, and Nancy sat down. And then we started to get served. And my mom said, "Should we wait for Nancy?" And I said, "Well, Nancy, she's right here." And I realized they couldn't see her. This one particular day, I asked my mom, "Is it okay if she stays for dinner?" And she said, "Sure." And then we started to get served. And my mom said, "Should we wait for Nancy?" And I said, "Well, Nancy, she's right here." My mom said, "Donna, you're joking around. When's Nancy coming?" And I realized they couldn't see her. And I was just silent the rest of dinner because I wasn't sure what to make of that. I was 7 years old. I guess they thought maybe I was playing with them. But then after that, every day when Nancy was around, they started seeing that I wasn't joking. Nancy never talked about why she couldn't be seen by anybody else. She just shrugged her shoulders. And we moved on to the next thing we were going to talk about. I tried not to think about it because I enjoyed having Nancy to play with. I wasn't lonely anymore, and she was really nice. She was just a normal kid to me. My family did indulge me. They knew that kids sometimes have imaginary friends. Don't sit there and don't get in the car. Nancy's getting in and you're gonna step on Nancy. It was starting to get to the point where it was enough for my parents. It was a day like every other day when Nancy was around, and she was spending the night with me that night. We were just laying on my bed, and, you know, we were whispering the way kids do, and it was past my bedtime. My dad was in the den reading, and I didn't want him to hear it because I didn't want to get in trouble. But my dad kept coming back to my bedroom.
Donna, go to bed and get your sleep.
Saying, it's bedtime, that's enough. And Nancy and I would keep giggling, you know, the way girls do.
Go to sleep, young lady.
He started getting a little bit louder. Nancy wasn't tired, and I wasn't tired either. We were just having fun. I could hear my dad coming back again, so we both rolled over and pretended like we were asleep, and he opened the door, and he was really upset. I told you 5 times now to go to bed, and I'm hearing you in here giggling. There's nobody here. I said, but Dad, Nancy, and when I said Nancy, he just exploded. There is no Nancy. I said, I'm sorry, I'll go to bed. And he said, no, there's no one here. It's enough already with this Nancy. And he said, this has got to end. And my dad looked around the room and said, Nancy, it's time for you to go. I want you to leave now. And I don't want you to come back. And I was really upset, and I started crying. And Nancy was really sad. I can't think of a time that Nancy was ever sad, and she was just weeping, this quiet, really sad cry. She got off the bed really slowly, and she was wiping her tears away, and I told her not to go.
You don't have to go.
She said she had to.
Your father doesn't want me here anymore.
And it was so upsetting. I laid back down and I buried my face in the pillow and I was crying. I looked around and she had left. She wasn't there anymore. The next morning, I went to meet everybody at the breakfast table before school, and everybody was already there. Everybody was really quiet, and I could tell something was very wrong.
Donna?
And my dad, he said, Donna, did Nancy have long blonde hair and wear a white gauzy dress? Nobody had ever asked me what she looked like before. Nobody cared about my dumb imaginary friend, but he described her perfectly. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what Nancy looks like. And my dad just went completely ashen and told me that he had seen Nancy. And I said, oh, well, where is she? You know. Then he told me that after he shut my door the night before, that he had gone back to the den and continued reading his book. And then he heard a noise. And he leaned over and looked down the hall, and a little girl with long blonde hair and this gauzy dress was coming from my bedroom, walking down the hall, and walked right past him, and she was crying. And he watched her walk to the front door down the hall and just faded into the front door. She didn't come around anymore, and I was alone again. I guess it dawned on me later, but I didn't notice at the time, was that Nancy never picked anything up or moved anything around. She was just there. I always would open doors for her. She mostly would meet me outside. My mom and dad decided to look into the history of where our house sat. And they went to the library and they were researching old records, and they eventually found a record, an old record from a couple of hundred years before, where there was a young girl who was 7 years old who had drowned in the lake across the street. The dress that she was wearing fit from that time period, and her name was Nancy, and she was the same age. They knew that was her. I think I was, for her, the same thing she was for me. We were both lonely. I think she was probably lonely too. And I was somebody she could play with. I don't know what I would have been like if she hadn't come around. I don't really know. I'd rather remember her as just a real little girl. I don't like thinking about the other.
I'm always open to experiences. I'm always open to things that are beyond my understanding. But at the same time, I don't go looking for them. I've always been intrigued by the idea of ghost stories. I always liked ghost stories, as I think most people do. I was raised in a household where there was a lot of negativity. My parents separated when I was 8 years old. And as a result of that, I ended up moving in with my grandparents. And for the better part of my childhood and preteen years, my grandparents were my legal guardians. They basically raised me as parents would. They would be the ones to take me to the set. As a matter of fact, you can see my grandmother appear at the very end of Goonies. And my grandmother was always a sweetheart. I mean, she was always the kindest woman. She cared so much about her family. She was always cooking. She was always worried about you, you know. A typical Jewish grandmother, very concerned about her children and her grandchildren and her family. Like, that was everything to her. Based on the destructive childhood that I had, the one thing she always wanted for me, above and beyond all else, was for me to have a happy and secure home life. That grounding and that stability and that family life that I never had. The house that we lived in was a very new house. I guess about like a year into living there, my ex-wife and I's marriage started kind of hitting the rocky road. Our relationship has gotten to a point where we don't get along a lot of the time. There was a lot of arguing, there was a lot of tension, and we started noticing a lot of weird things happening. You would hear kind of like thumping. Maybe it sounded like the air conditioning or the heater system kicking on or off, but it wasn't kicking on the heat or the AC, and there's nothing coming out of the vents, so it's not that. I also heard lots of scampering type sounds and kind of scratching noises. Maybe there's just animals in the wall. I mean, we do live kind of out in nature, but I never found anything in the house. I started going, look, this isn't right. Obviously, there's got to be some mechanical problems going on in the house. So I started having, service guys come out, checking the pipes, checking the drainage systems. Is the AC machine breaking down? Some nights we would wake up and it was like bang, bang, bang. It was loud, and they're getting more and more regular. Certainly, while things were surmounting between my wife and I, and things were getting worse and growing into a kind of destructive formula. My son would do this thing, which was kind of strange to me, where he'd be in the middle of playing and then all of a sudden he'd freeze. Like he was put on pause. During that time period, it was ironic that the energy in the house also was getting worse. Our nanny started coming to us saying things like, I could have sworn I heard voices coming from Zen's room over the monitor. And so I went in there and I peeked my head in and he was turned the other way, kind of facing the wall. And he was, talking directly at something that wasn't there. In his mind, at least, there was a presence in the room with him that he was talking to. And then he started telling me about a woman that would come and visit him. And I would ask if he ever saw their faces, and he would say yes. But then again, it was, a 2.5, 3-year-old kid, so I'm figuring, well, he's probably got a pretty active imagination. As things progressed in the house and things kind of became stranger, I mean, literally, you could take a line and you could draw together the comparisons of, while we were arguing, while things were getting worse, the energy in the house kept getting stranger, and these occurrences kept getting stronger. So one night I'm sitting in my office and I hear this low tone, like a motor almost, but not a motor, like a hum. Felt like it was coming from the ground underneath me. Whatever it is, this can't be good. Checked every room in the house. I could not find one running motor anywhere. And every room in the house, I could hear this hum, like the house was literally alive. And then there was a banging, which sounded like it was coming through the walls, in addition to the humming noise. So I was investigating, where's the banging coming from? And I went over to check the alarm, and the alarm was not on. And it was telling me that the alarm wasn't on because there was a door open. By this point, I was pretty freaked out. I grabbed this giant knife. And that's when I start hearing this voice. It sounded like an older woman with an accent. Almost like she was telling a story or giving some sort of narration, but not talking to herself, like almost in a conversational way. And I'm like, okay, maybe there's somebody in the room. Maybe that's what it is. Somebody got into the house and they're in the room. So I go running up the stairs. And there's nobody there. And my child is sound asleep. And I cannot figure out, you know, what's going on. And as I'm laying there in the dark with him, then that's when I notice my grandfather's ring. He loved this ring so much, he always wore this ring, and he gave one to each boy in the family. I guess it was some sort of symbolism for him of, you know, what it meant to be part of the family. And that ring was always kept in my safe because it's very valuable. I was literally the only one who went in that safe. It sent shivers down my spine because I don't know how it could possibly get there. It was my grandmother's spirit. She wanted me to see that ring. She played some part in my eyes opening and seeing the reality of what was happening at home and making the decision that I needed to change my life and move on to give Zen the best childhood opportunity that he could ever have. And I don't want to make him grow up with parents that aren't affectionate, that don't seem to love each other. And that was very important to me. And it was probably within the next 30 days that my wife and I ended up getting divorced. And I haven't heard any strange noises or had any strange feelings in the new house that I have with my son. All the energy worked together to get me out of that situation and bring me closer to my son.
Celebrity ghost stories.
We were alone in a house that was built in 1836. We heard shoes walking toward our door, and then no one was there. Our landlord, she asked me if my husband was scared. And I said, yes, he is scared. And she said, he ought to be.
I don't get visibly shaken up. I'm pretty fearless, I have to say. I'm swimming around out of nowhere, something scratching my face, scratching my shoulders. And when I turn back around, nobody there.
The day I walked into that house, there was always something not right, like an unsafe feeling, something evil. And I knew I was in for something.
I definitely felt at one point in the night, somebody was kind of watching us. There was kind of a presence, like an invisible hand. I looked to make sure my daughter was all right. My heart jumped into my throat. She had vanished.
I didn't think I'd get a whole lot of extra chances. I really wanted to be alive. And whatever's in the unseen is usually a lot more forgiving than we are towards ourselves. I was raised in the suburbs, kind of close to Atlanta. And I had a brief adventurous spell at the age of 20 and went south, middle Georgia. And I was shooting pool in a bar one night, and I looked across the table at this really handsome guy. I went, I'm gonna marry him. And that's what happened 3 months later, like at warp speed. We moved out to the country. All of it happened just so fast. All of a sudden, I realized you could only see a windmill for miles. And I'm a people person. We were alone in a house that was built in 1836. It's a big, big house, and the floors were bare wood. The hills were pretty, and it was so boring. It's not one of the prouder times of my life. It was a tough marriage. Because I don't think happy people strike out. And happy people don't stay after it happens more than once. I did love my mother-in-law, and one day she looked at me and she said, "I want you to know I told him not to hit you so much." Even at the time, I remember going, I'm gonna need to see that list of days where it's okay to do it. A lot of what happened to me would happen out of the blue. And on a particular night, we heard the distinct sound of a man's hard sole shoes walking slowly down the hall toward our door. The dogs were on the other side of the house. They were barking, really, really barking, going to town, and I don't think there's a way they could have heard that. It was that far away. The steps got closer, and then they stopped outside of our bedroom door. I lived with this big, strong guy who lived very close to many, many weapons. He gave me a pistol and put it in my hand. Take this. I can't take that. He said, "You go first." Him being scared scared me. Big, strong people are scared, then I was too. I got the door open, flung it open, and no one was there. No one had any time to go anywhere if they had been standing right there.
You see anything?
It wasn't a real person. I looked at him, and this was getting bad. He was very concerned because I could tell he was afraid, and he was also trying to make sense of it and to be brave for me. And I could actually almost hear and feel his heart beating a long time after mine calmed down. And after about an hour and a half, the footsteps just slowly walked away again. That weekend, one of my husband's cousins called to ask if they could come down and see us. We were busy out in the side of the yard, and my husband's cousin asked, she was tired and wanted to take a nap. And I said, "Go use our bedroom. It's in the front of the house, away from the porch and the garden and everything." And she came out, and she looked annoyed. "What is it?" She said, "I thought y'all were gonna keep it down." And my husband heard this from 50 feet away and said, "What happened?" She said, "Somebody's moving stuff around upstairs." She seemed to think we were like pulling something on her. We had one room upstairs, the attic, and all it contained were ancient boxes of Progressive, Farmer, and Ladies' Home Journal magazines. And the only way to get in that room was upstairs, right over our bedroom, those steps. We went up the stairs. I galloped up there. She said, "Somebody's moving stuff around upstairs." We had one room upstairs, the attic. The only way to get in that room was upstairs, right over our bedroom, those steps. We went up the stairs. I galloped up there. The door was not only pressed all the way shut and locked from the other side. Every box in the room were pressed up against the door all the way to the top. And the weird part of it was the dust on the boxes remained the same as they had been a month before when I'd been up there. Everything was just someplace different. My husband's cousin said it was full out footsteps on the floor, boxes, more than one person. Somebody was having basically a moving party while we were outside. We heard shoes walking down the hall every night for a month. And my husband was a mess. He had circles under his eyes, and he was not sleeping much. I was there alone during the day and never even thought about it, really. Things would be almost dangerous and only happen to him. We had this clothesline. He was out there taking something from it, and it was cut clean through from the other end and sprang back on him. Doors would kick open in front of him. Things were happening with such regularity that it was really hard for him. He was petrified, and I remember thinking, having this moment of, good. I kind of wanted him to know what that felt like. I think he might have realized that in a passive-aggressive way I was amused by this, and it was tense. It was not a good time. It made it worse. The person who beats their loved ones most of the time is not that person. So in a way, when I saw him scared, I felt bad for him. He really didn't know what to do. I decided to go see our landlord, and I liked the wife. I pulled up, and before I could really even say anything, she said, hey, y'all had company up there. And I said, so do you know about this? And she said, yeah, we've had the house since 1836. I didn't want to ask. There was this look in her eye, and she asked me if my husband was scared. And I said, yes, he is scared. And she said, he ought to be. I felt looked after at that moment, like, oh, somebody knows that something unfair is happening there. It was like they saw what he did and were scolding him. My husband decided he'd had enough of that particular house. And one of our last nights there, it just looked close to a fight, the kind of fight that ends up being bad, painful for both of us.
Get your ass back here.
And I just hopped in the truck and went away for a while. When I got back, hours after midnight, he was sitting almost in the road. I rolled down the window and said, are you okay? He looked really vulnerable. He was bigger than I was and older than I was and everything, but he was sitting there and didn't get up and just looked at me and said,
whoever's in there, don't like me.
It's a strange thing watching him sit on that curb that night and just look at me and goes, he was not mad at me anymore. That spirit was as close to therapy as he ever had. He just never really was the same guy after that. We moved away from there, and we've been divorced for 30 years. I kind of want to thank the ghost.
Being Elvira, you know, I'm usually like skipping through graveyards and laying in coffins, and, you know, I'm sure I've been in a coffin more than any living person on Earth. So people were always asking me, have you ever had any, you know, spooky experiences? And I'm sort of like, no. You know, just nothing happening there. So it was pretty odd when this started happening for me. Every day I would walk through the neighborhood, and one day I was going down a hill and I saw a chicken. I followed it because that was pretty unusual in the Hollywood Hills just to see a chicken running around. And I got on my hands and knees and kind of crawled under these bushes to see where this chicken was going. And there was a big, old, rundown house behind these brambles. It's this overgrown, huge house, nothing but trees and bushes around it. And I couldn't believe my eyes because I had walked past this a million times and didn't even know there was a house there. And there was a for sale sign on the other side of the bushes. It seemed like a very magical, dark, strange place. And being Elvira, I was kind of into that. I thought, ooh, this is kind of creepy and spooky, very Elvira-like. And I told my husband about it, called the number on the sign. We bought the house. It was a 1905 Craftsman, real mansion, with a gigantic Olympic-sized swimming pool, but had obviously fallen into serious disrepair. The first day that we moved in the house, I went to the movers and told them specifically not to put anything on the 3rd floor. It had a very narrow staircase that made several turns, and I said, we don't know what we're going to do with that big room up there. Don't take anything up there. So I was running around putting things away as the movers came in. And I heard above me on the 3rd floor, footsteps really kind of pounding around up there. And I stood there, listened again, and I went, oh, you know, the movers, great.
Who's up there?
I dropped what I was doing, ran up the stairs, yelling, you know, you guys, please, you know, I don't want anything up there. And when I got upstairs, there was nothing there at all. And nothing was happening. I knew a workman couldn't be up there because when I got up there, there's only one way up and one way down. You couldn't possibly go out of a window, and you'd be straight down on the ground 3 stories. And I'm gonna tell you, just right now, it's making the hair stand on the back of my neck. Very soon after that, it was a hot day, and I decided to get in the pool. And I kept seeing a dark shadow on the bottom of the pool. It was in the deep end, it was in one spot, very faint, very hazy, but always a dark spot. It did feel like a figure, about the shape of a human body. It was a hot day, and I decided to get in the pool. I kept seeing a dark shadow on the bottom of the pool. It was in the deep end, it was in one spot, about the shape of a human body. I even pointed it out to my husband, who saw it. I said, do you see that there, right in that area, there's a shadow? And he saw it, and he believed me. We'd both seen it together. And there was really no explanation. It wasn't long after that. I was having a dinner party one night, and I was getting ready upstairs, and I heard a noise downstairs, and I thought, gosh, I wonder if someone's already here. And I ran downstairs in my robe, and there was a man sitting in front of my wingback chair, right in front of the fireplace.
Hello?
He had slicked back hair, kind of a big mustache. I wasn't too shocked or startled because I thought, maybe this is someone that came with one of our guests to the party.
Who are you?
This man sitting in this chair looked at me so directly, so deeply, that just the way he was looking at me made me very, very uncomfortable. I was just thinking, why is he looking at me like that? And he just kept boring straight into me. And I turned around, getting very nervous, and yelled up the stairs for my husband.
Mark! Mark!
And when I turned back around, nobody there. I didn't turn my head for more than a split second. I mean, it wasn't like I turned around, the guy got up, walked out of the room.
What are you talking
When he was gone and my husband was there and he saw how shaken up I was,
I don't see anyone.
I was close to tears. I don't get visibly shaken up. I'm pretty fearless, I have to say. You know, I'm mistress of the dark, what can I say? So I think the fact that I was scared really made him, believe what I was saying. I began thinking who this could be immediately. I actually talked to some neighbors, and they were an old couple in their 90s, and they knew a lot of information about the house. They told us some amazing stories about the owner and his wife. There was a party at the house. It was sometime in the 1920s. Many, many celebrities in Hollywood at that time were invited. They had a lot of pictures. There are many pictures of people that had that same feeling with the mustache and the hair kind of back. A few people, guests, were staying from out of town at the house. And the husband came into the bedroom, apparently found his wife with another man, and began storming and ranting and screaming. The other guests ran out of the house and kind of got away from him because he was going nuts. They later discovered that the man was floating in the pool, dead. The owner of the house was never charged in a death. He was very, very wealthy and very powerful, and really didn't have to be held accountable for what happened. During the summer, I was entertaining my little niece who was staying with me, and she was 6 years old, and we went out to the pool. I'm swimming around, just not thinking about anything. Out of nowhere, I didn't see it coming. Suddenly, I had something grab a hold of me, and I was just being pushed under, scratching my face, scratching my shoulders. I was desperately trying to get up. No matter how hard I kept trying to get to the top, I couldn't, and I was just being clawed and pushed down. And I really thought, this is it. I'm doing everything I can to get to the surface of the water. I couldn't touch the bottom, and I had no idea what it was. The next thing I knew, my niece was there with the rubber raft, and I was able to grab a hold of it. It was so frightening. I was really just scratched to bits. My shoulders and my arms, my face were clawed up. I was bleeding, crying, coughing up water. I came this close to dying, and I really have to credit my niece, Paige, for saving my life. Many things went through my head trying to make a connection of what this was, and I thought a lot about the man that I saw sitting in front of the fireplace. I mean, I've come to the conclusion he was definitely the man who was a party goer who was killed by the husband. A person who was tragically killed before his time and couldn't let go. I really do believe that people who are killed in a tragic manner, in this house, a murder, that their spirit doesn't feel that it can be released and leave. They're maybe constantly reliving the tragedy that happened to them, and they're not ready to leave. They're not ready to leave it. So they're clinging on, and the noises and the things they do are attempts to, like, get help. I discussed it with my husband and said, I want out. I don't care how much money we lose. I just want to get out of here. I couldn't stay there anymore. So we went ahead and sold it.
When I was younger, I was able to see a lot of things. I was able to walk into houses and feel stuff or see stuff that normal people couldn't see. No one ever talked about paranormal or ghosts or anything. Certainly didn't bring it up around them, just out of fear or what they might think or how they would react to what I was saying. I had just recently moved to Los Angeles, and the house that I lived in was this 20-year-old Spanish-style home in the hills, about 5,000 square feet, right on the edge of a mountain that can oversee Los Angeles. It's the dream house that anyone would want to live in. The day I walked into that house, I felt something weird, like an unsafe feeling, something not right. I put a light switch on, and the light blew. And I knew I was in for something. Something's in there. As the days went by, you start hearing things. And then, of course, you know, because you just moved into a house, it could be the house. It could be the house settling. Every house has weird noises or things happen. But a noise isn't just a noise when you have that feeling. And that is when I actually called in a psychic medium to kind of figure out what was going on in the house. This person had worked for the police. She was a forensic psychic. And the minute that she walked into the house, it was just like a floodgate. She told us that the most evil stuff was upstairs. She felt the evil in that area. She mentioned strangulation, like she couldn't breathe. She put her hand on her neck, and somebody
was murdered here.
And then we just kept on walking through the house, and she immediately found the spirit.
It's a woman. Her name is Aria.
She was one of the spirits that was killed.
She's jealous.
She was a jealous spirit.
She's in love with you.
The spirit was in love with me, according to the psychic. And that kind of freaked my girlfriend out a bit. And my girlfriend thought, well, is she gonna hurt me? Where am I in this? And then we went downstairs in the basement. The psychic, she's just looking around. And then she said, oh, hello, little boy. What's your name? And she started talking to the boy.
Yes. He likes boats.
Boats. That's what he loved. He loved boats. And he just wanted to know.
He wants to know if he can stay here.
Yeah, sure.
She started talking to the boy, getting the information that we were all wanting to know. He used to hide in the closet to be away from his abusive father. So every time the father came home, he would run and hide in the closet. The father eventually beat him to death. And this boy was murdered on this piece of land 100 years ago. The psychic said the boy was buried in the backyard underneath the patio, deep into the ground. I was freaked out by it. You know, that would freak anybody out. but I kind of just shrugged it off and just kind of went with it and lived there. After a short time of living in the house, I was downstairs in the basement area. And I was sitting down there watching television one day, and I heard the door of the closet squeak. Just a opening of the door. After a short time of living in the house, I was downstairs, and I was sitting down there watching television one day, and I heard the door of the closet squeak. Just a opening of the door. And in the corner was a freestanding mirror. And that was the first time I saw the boy. I remember seeing him sneak his head around the mirror and kind of look at me and then sneak back. And then he would sneak around again and look at me, and then he'd sneak back. And the boy was very playful. I could see his face. I could see him smiling. Downstairs, I saw him at certain times, heard him a lot. You would walk in that room and the door would just open up, and you just knew he was there. You have this boy, this presence there that just is trying to communicate with you in some way, and giving the okay for him to do that made him happy. Eventually, I ran into the next spirit, Aria. I was always up first in the house, and I would go directly down a hallway to the kitchen to get my coffee. I immediately smelled perfume. A couple of years ago, I went through a couple of operations, and to this day, I can't smell or taste. So that's the only perfume that I could smell in the house. And I was the only one that could smell her, which I thought was very odd. And she made herself present there almost every day in that exact area, that one little stretch of hallway. I thought maybe Aria was the wife of this guy, the abusive dad. And maybe she was there to protect the boy. So that was a little more special to me. When my girlfriend was around, the female spirit definitely made herself known. I was sitting on the couch one night with my girlfriend, and I remember her eyes turned a little bit looking at the hallway, and she turned to me, and just at that moment, the kitchen lights went crazy, and one of the recess lights fell from the ceiling. And that was one of the times that where Aria made herself present.
What the hell is that?
And really freaked out my girlfriend. At one point, we had been sleeping. It's the middle of the night. My girlfriend saw her, physically saw her, and I slept through it. My girlfriend talked about her being there. She saw her a lot. It definitely freaked her out. We ended up moving from that house. I don't know, we felt a little sad. And we felt like we were kind of leaving people behind. With Aria, I didn't really know how to say goodbye, other than say goodbye. And that was it. Knowing that what we knew about the boy and how he loved boats, we ended up buying a toy boat for him to play with. And we specifically put it out of the basement so he can come up and play and not have to be downstairs. So we left it. That was one of the last things we did. That would be our way of saying, come on up and play. The house is yours.
My maternal grandmother was Romanian, and she came actually from Transylvania, which, you know, obviously has a great history in terms of vampires and spirituality and kind of lore. So as a child, I was definitely led to believe that that side of the family was a little bit more psychic, a little more spiritually aware. Certainly a presence of ghosts was not considered an outrageous or terrifying thing. In about 2004, I was performing at the Roosevelt in the Cinegrill, which was there at the time. It was a beautiful cabaret space. The Hollywood Roosevelt Hotel is a very famous Hollywood relic. It's very, very sort of magical and takes you back in time in a very sort of mysterious and glamorous old Hollywood way. They house their performers in what's called the Performer's Suite. It's a 2-room suite. It's really, really comfortable. There's a long, long corridor, at the end of which is a very beautiful, glamorous Hollywood-style living room with a baby grand piano and couches and a little bar where you might gather around and listen to somebody sing or just have a little ambient party. It had recently been renovated, so it felt sort of beautiful and fresh and clean, but in that way, where I'm perceptive, I was a little worried. Sometimes with renovations, things get kicked up and kind of come to life. I was traveling with my daughter, who was 2 at the time. And at one point in the night, when I woke up to check on my child, there's normal hotel noises and normal street noises, but then there's sort of slightly howling sounds and slightly cold air blows through, and curtains tend to sort of blow in the breeze. I definitely felt somebody was kind of watching us. There's normal hotel noises and normal street noises, but then there's sort of slightly howling sounds and slightly cold air blows through, and curtains tend to sort of blow in the breeze. I definitely felt somebody was kind of watching us. And we were on the top floor, so there wasn't anybody in the window. I was in my room. I was sitting at the vanity. The door was behind me. I was putting on makeup in the mirror. I could hear music coming from down the hall, but my daughter was kind of coming and going and, you know, safely in the hotel room, toddling about and talking and playing with my makeup and singing. And I kept kind of hearing music coming and going and hearing her chitter-chatter, as toddlers do. When you have children, you're always sort of hearing peripheral noise. And I kept hearing the piano, and I kept thinking it was my child, sort of tinkering on the piano. I got up from the vanity and I heard the music and I turned the corner and I realized she wasn't at the piano. She was playing on the floor. My heart kind of jumped into my throat, but I didn't want to alarm my daughter. So we walked into the room. The music stopped. And I kind of took a deep breath and held her hand and moved out of the piano room. The next day, I heard the piano again. Francis was with me at this point. And the piano was tinkling. And I walked down the hall and I followed the music. I was at one doorway and there was a long corridor in front of me and the other doorway and then the piano. And I stood in the doorway. I could see the piano, I could see the piano keys. And they were playing on their own. It was like an invisible hand. Somebody was playing the piano. There was kind of a presence, like a really cool presence. And I felt a really cold, cool presence moving past me. The presence just kind of moved out and the music stopped. And that's when I knew a ghost had absolutely been playing the piano. Went back to my room, kind of got my wits about me. Got up, walked to the closet to get my coat. There was just directly in front of me, a full person. And I sort of screamed. There was like a little scream. And my heart kind of leapt. A very young or small woman in a maid's outfit was standing in the coat closet. I looked again and I realized she was playful. There was a childlike curiosity, a youthfulness, a playful, almost, not mocking, but like a teasing, like a laughing. I looked to make sure my daughter was sort of all right, instinctively. I looked back and she was gone. There was nobody there. Nobody. Without a doubt, I saw a ghost. I saw a person. This was a person who could apparate, who could move in and out of walls and in and out of doors, and clearly in and out of hotel rooms. Kind of brought it into very clear focus without any argument whatsoever that this was a spirit. This was somebody from the other side. I think it's scary to be startled. I think it's scary when you're taken by surprise and when you see something you feel like you aren't sure if you've seen. Apart from being startled and maybe having the feeling of being invaded slightly, once it's kind of clear what's going on, if there's a history somewhere, in retrospect, it's not terrifying. I started asking around, and sure enough, that hotel has an incredible legacy of ghosts and of glamorous ghosts and of presences and spirits and things like that. Bringing performers in was part of its new identity. There's part of me that believes that there was interest. There was interest in my room. There was interest in performers being there and singers being there, and the fact that I was warming up, I was playing in there, I was doing my scales, and I kind of feel like maybe there was an excitement around that. Old Hollywood glamour kind of coming back to relive its past. It definitely feels like whatever was there before is still hanging around. sort of sense of lost souls. Still there. Still there. It'd be nice if they could all go where they needed to go eventually.
Celebrity ghost stories.
There were only two of us in the room, as far as we knew. What was this vision? What was this apparition? We suddenly heard voices. It was disturbing.
The air itself somehow became thicker. And then, with every passing second, it was getting more and more intense, as though it was feeding off my fear. I'm just freaking out.
It becomes instantly clear to me that whatever's coming through her is, without question, intense, scary as hell, and I'm not sure is friendly.
I did see a shadow go by, at least what I thought was a shadow. Hear a voice like somebody else was in the room with me, and that took me to a whole nother level of being freaked out. What can you do?
We were certainly scared enough by it to have that lodge in our memories all these years later. Let me tell you what I'll carry with me for life about what we saw and experienced in Russia. The year was 1988, and I had composed a song with a wonderful producer, composer, David Foster, and it was intended to be recorded by the Red Army Choir in Russia. I was there not only with David Foster, but a big part of the trip for me was that I could take my 14-year-old son, Brennan, along on the trip. So this was going to be a major cultural experience, and Dad was pretty proud to be able to show him that exotic, distant country for a few days. It was dead of winter, February, as cold as it gets on planet Earth, and getting dark by late afternoon. So when we got in, it felt like nighttime, even though it wasn't. The Imperial Hotel in Moscow was one of the most famous. When we arrived at this rather stark, austere hotel, all of the mannerisms and greetings and exchanges with the people reflected the look of that rather dark and gloomy edifice. There was a lot of activity in the lobby when we first arrived. Everyone seemed to be either a member of the military or dressed in the fashion of the day in Moscow, which had a decidedly militaristic bent to it. After that, we were taken to our hotel room, and we were going through this hallway. There was some sort of electrical difficulty. It was a dark, flickering kind of experience in the hallway. When you opened the door to that suite, it was stark. It was gray. A very simple little table. I remember dead flower in a tiny vase in the middle of that table. Very plain bedding. It was not fancy.
You're hungry?
So we were in the room getting unpacked and discussing what our activities would be and how excited we were, when suddenly the TV turned on.
Did you turn that on? No. Did you?
No. Kind of reacted to that. And then it was black.
Did you just turn it off? I didn't turn it off.
We were confused and a little confounded. We suddenly heard voices in the bathroom. There were only two of us in the room, as far as we knew. Who was it? Where was that sound coming from? I stepped over to the closed door of the bathroom and opened the door. Sure enough, no one there. As we settled in, kind of uncomfortably looking at each other, suddenly there was a knock on the door. We jumped and responded to that sudden noise and went with some trepidation toward the door, opening it ever so slightly. And at the end of the hallway, it was dark, but there was movement. It seemed to be, at first blush, black draperies, possibly being disturbed, moved around by the wind. I took a couple steps toward that blackness. What I saw was the back of a man in a long black cloak, clearly moving, not trying to be unseen or unnoticed. Somebody or something all in black was at the end of the hallway. I'm stuck, I'm motionless. That was as close as I wanted to get. I'm stuck, I'm motionless. That was as close as I wanted to get.
Dad? Dad.
At that moment, Brennan is calling from the room. I turned to the room, I turned back. I don't see it anymore. Whatever I'm looking at is gone.
Get back in. What is it? Get back in. Stop.
I got back to the room, back to my son as quickly as I could. What was this vision? What was this apparition? It was disturbing. It would have been difficult to fall asleep, so we didn't try. The next day before we set out, I had a chance to look around the hotel lobby again. I noticed off in the corner a display behind glass. I was drawn to it, and when I got there and looked through the glass, the most startling artifact in this display was a large man's black cape-like coat, identical to what I had seen the night before. And upon further examination, I saw that the artifacts and the cloak itself were all the property of Rasputin, the mad monk. It was explained to us by this kind of room service attendant that Rasputin was the psychic mystic who had endeared himself into Tsar Nicholas's family as a trusted advisor, confidant. Most of his activity, scandalous as it was, took place in St. Petersburg, but some of his most nefarious deeds took place in Moscow, right there in the Imperial Hotel, where he had gathered his adversaries on the pretense of having some conciliatory meeting, and in fact, they were there to be tortured or executed.
Нет, что вы делаете? Остави вас! Я ничего не знаю! Я ничего не знаю!
Some of those tortured souls never made it out of the Imperial Hotel. They're there today. The very hotel we were at was haunted by the souls of some of the deceased who had been offed by the mad monk, and maybe even Rasputin himself. Rasputin was surrounded in mystery in his life and is surrounded by at least as many mysteries in death. And I was in the middle of one of them.
This is literally one of the most frightening times I can remember in my life. I was so, so terrified. The worst part of it was, it wasn't like it was a shadow of a person or an orb or these other things that people talk about. I don't know what it was. I started acting when I was 6. I'd always traveled with my mother. And when we would come to Los Angeles for meetings or for auditions, we were always together. And we always stayed at this one particular hotel. It's a beautiful, famous, old Hollywood hotel. It looks as though it stopped in time. Everybody there knew me. They were like family. And when I was about 15 or 16, it was my first trip to Los Angeles alone. So I came to the hotel, said hi to everybody, and they brought me to my room, which was on a different floor than I'd ever stayed. And I asked them why, and they said, oh, unfortunately, your room was booked, so we're putting you in here. They put me on the very first floor, which is closest to the lobby. I ordered my dinner and got ready for bed, and I was really, really cold. I went over and looked at the meter, and it shouldn't have been that cold at all. I looked at the clock and saw how late it was, and I knew I had to get up really early the next day because I had this huge audition that I was very excited and very nervous about. So I went and got an extra blanket out of the closet and turned all the lights off. Went and got into bed and bundled up, went to lay down to go to sleep. Tried to just relax and think good thoughts. Okay, I'm gonna do a good job tomorrow and I'm gonna get this job. Then the light turns back on. So I turned it back off. Rolled back over. Relaxing, trying to go to sleep. Click, light comes back on. Okay, turn it back off. Light comes back on. I started to get the creeps. The room got much colder. It got so cold that I was actually starting to shiver, even though I was underneath the covers. I'm sitting up in bed and I've got the covers up around my neck. And it's just getting colder and colder and colder, and I'm getting more and more frightened. I could see my breath in the room. And all the hair was standing up on my arms and the back of my neck. The air itself somehow became thicker. It was tangible, like you could reach out and grab it if you wanted to. It looked sparkly. And then the chair in front of the desk crashes to the floor. And I jump. I held my finger up because if the finger was moving with the chair, then I knew it was my imagination. But the chair moved past my hand. I knew that it was definitely moving, and I knew something was in here. The curtains started to billow, even though the French doors closed. All of a sudden, everything in the room went berserk. The light on the ceiling was turning on and off. The desk started to move. The curtains were literally flying all over the place. It just got worse and worse and worse and worse. At this point, I'm just freaking out. I can't move. I can't scream. No sound will come out of my throat. With every passing second, it was getting more and more intense, as though it was feeding off my fear, like the room itself was possessed. I'm trying to figure out how to get to the door, how to get out of this room, and how to get away from whatever it is that's in there. I pull the covers up over my eyes. I take a deep breath. I tell myself I'm a big girl. I tell myself I'm strong enough to handle this. I tell myself not to be afraid, that whatever it is that's in there, it can't hurt me. It's not alive. And I'm sucking up my courage, and as I take the deep breath to get up, as I take the deep breath to get up, the bed underneath me goes ka-boom. The bed lifts up, probably about a foot off of the floor, to the point where it throws me up. I land and I bolt. I grab the door, I turn around, and the air was thick like fog, and it came at me. I ran in my bare feet and my 90 towards the lobby. I looked over my shoulder, and you could see it in the doorway. You could see it coming, like it was coming out of the door. I could feel it rushing behind me. It was coming after me. I balled up my fists, and I flew. There were gusts of wind going past me. My hair was whipping around. I wasn't even sure I was gonna get to the lobby. I just had to run as fast as I could and pray that I'd make it. I got to the lobby and I opened my mouth to tell them what had happened, and no sound came out. It was as though someone had put a vice around my throat and around my stomach. So the only sound that would come out of my mouth was, "There's something in my room, there's something in my room, there's something in my room." Panicking. They're, calm down. They take me behind the desk, they wrap a little blanket around me. "Calm down, sweetie. Tell us what happens, what's going on?" Within about an hour, I could finally talk about what had happened. And I told them I didn't want to go back to the room. I didn't want to even go near the room. There was something in there. No one can tell me that it wasn't. I knew it. Trying to convince them, saying, I swear this happened.
We will get you another room right.
And they said, "You don't have to convince us, it's okay. We know." I said, "This is something you know about? This has happened here before? In there?" And they said, "Well, yeah, the first floor, we've had a few incidents." There was a woman who worked as a maid. She did say under her breath, she should never have been put in that room. She's too young. And I was just like, what? I was on a flight home the next day. I just wanted to go home. Whatever it was really angry. And it felt more than anything like it needed to be noticed. And it was angry that it wasn't. I still visit the hotel. I don't stay in the hotel, but I go, I have lunch. The interesting thing is, that room that I stayed in actually got sealed shut. So no one can stay in there anymore. And it wasn't just because of me. They'd had other incidences there to the point where they felt that it was unsafe. So at least that way I knew that I wasn't the only one that had experienced that and that it was real.
I'd always heard about events happening in life to other people who I believed and trusted. But until it happens to you, you really don't know what any of it means. I myself encountered something in my early to mid-20s. It still scares the living life out of me when I try to explain what the hell it was. I was dating a woman, Sally, for about 6 months. We had started spending the nights together at her apartment. I was really quite taken with this girl. She was unbelievably sweet and gentle. Sally was one of these women who, within seconds of their head hitting the pillow, they're asleep. And it's easy to envy that for someone like me who takes 20 minutes to an hour. So during one of those passages of trying to shut down, Sally sleeping next to me, dead to the world. I was decompressing in the silence, and then it began. I heard the sound. I couldn't even grasp how to describe what the sound was. It was like hearing whispers coming from the walls. And that's when it got really weird.
Stop looking at me! Stop looking at me! Stop looking at me!
This insane, angry voice came from Sally, and it was a voice that spoke in a language that I wasn't familiar with. The voice is almost a shrill, but it was not just screaming. It had words and sentence structure, but this was not Sally's voice. This is not Sally goofing around, because you can't make up this language at the speed and rate with which it's being shared. The volume was really intense, and how is this not waking up Sally? Sally's not moving, but her head and face and mouth are, and there's facial expression. Should I stop it? Do I wake her? Sally's not moving, but her head and face and mouth are, and there's facial expressions. Should I stop it? Do I wake her? Eventually it stopped, and then I spent the rest of the night imagining how I was going to broach the subject the next morning. And then I just kind of decided, you know, it must have been an anomaly. I'm gonna let it go. I certainly don't want to spend too much more time thinking about it. I will say each night I sort of waited for the voice to return and didn't sleep terribly well as I waited. It took maybe a week, and it returned. There I was, half hour into my decompressing, and then it began. She was intense, scary as hell. And I turn on the light, and the voice is still going, but I can see that Sally is asleep and utterly unaware that this is happening, that the lights have been turned on. She's asleep. It becomes instantly clear to me that whatever's coming through her is without question a separate, wholly separate entity that I'm not sure is friendly. It went on for a good hour. I was as freaked out as I've ever been. So now I have to talk to Sally. So I laid it out for Sally, what had happened, these two experiences, and asked her if anything like this had ever been reported to her. She was unaware. She was not dismissive, and if anything, said something like, I've been told that I am in touch with spirits. I was afraid for Sally, without question. And at this point, Sally is starting to get a little freaked out herself. I'm crazy about Sally, and this is now a part of Sally, but this is no way to live. I wanted her so very much to understand what I was going through. I decided to record it. So I get a little recorder. I just wanted to capture it, play it for Sally, so that someone else could experience the abject, bizarre nature of this entity. I bring the recorder to bed, slip it into the bedside table. 5 or 6 nights later, my moment comes. Within 10 minutes of Sally being asleep, it began. And while it's doing that, I reach over, open the side table, take out the little recorder, and as I push those buttons down, it stops talking on a dime. I've got the recorder held up. Sally's eyes are closed. It had been yammering nonstop, intensely, freaky scary for a good 4 or 5 minutes. I hold up a recorder, it stops. The buttons are pressed. I'm waiting for it to start talking again. It's weird that it stopped. It's scaring the hell out of me that it stopped, but I'm still on a mission. I'm waiting minute after minute after minute, and the voice doesn't come back. I'm sitting there frozen, scared, freaked out. I probably waited 10 minutes, and the voice doesn't come back. I turn the recorder off, put it back at the bedside table. I put my head down on the pillow. It was literally a, oh no. This can only get worse. And the only way for me to really get over this was to try to engage it. I'm gonna see if there's any way to get over the fear. So, during a pause of it speaking, I said hello.
Hello.
Sally's head turned towards me, clearly registering that someone had spoken, and then rapid fire, crazy, weird ranting. So I went from fear and confusion as to what I'm supposed to do now. Various thoughts went through my mind, Pack went through my mind. I was really quite taken with this girl, so I didn't think running made a lot of sense. I tried to explain that to Sally the next day. She's frightened and wants answers. I asked other people, is there any history of this apartment? Is there any history of this building? In the 20s, it was reported in the building. Various untimely suicides happened in a couple of months.
Why don't you love me?
I can't
live without you.
Stop looking at me! Stop looking at me!
Started to get a sense that a no longer living person is using Sally's body to communicate from another world. It lasted in total probably 6 months. How we stayed together that long during it, I don't know. Even though I wasn't seeing a floating body in a room, this was a ghost story experience, unlike any I'd heard, and any that I was interested in experiencing ever again.
If you're a non-believer, you don't believe in ghosts, you don't believe in spirits, that's fine. You know, I used to be one myself. But just be prepared, because if it does happen to you, like it did to me, it will blow your mind. I have a really good friend named Kai, and we've been friends for many years. I had met Kai before I even became a professional fighter. I actually had a nail salon and was doing nails, and Kai had a hair salon and was a hairstylist. You know, we spent a lot of time together, and we became best friends really quickly. And normally, you know, I'll go to her place, she'll come to my place, but she moved into this new house, and all of a sudden she stopped inviting me over. And it had been a year, and I hadn't been over there yet. And that's when I asked her, hey, you know, what's up? When am I gonna come over to your new place? So that's when she told me that she thought that her house was haunted. And I don't want anyone coming over there and thinking it's strange or thinking I'm strange for living there. And I was like, come on now, are you serious? What makes you think that your house is haunted? And that's when she told me that a lot of times she'd be in the kitchen and she'd turn around and a cabinet would be open that she knows she didn't open. You know, shadows in the hallway and, you know, somebody sitting on the side of her bed when she was home. I said, okay, well, I'm not afraid of any ghosts, so I definitely want to come over one day and I'll take my chances. She finally invited me over and she told me, okay, remember I warned you that my house is haunted? I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever. So I followed her to her house. Didn't look scary at all to me. So I wasn't nervous at all at the time about going into the house. So I go to her house and we're sitting in the living room. And of course, I'm looking around like I don't see anything. And she's like, okay, you know, sometimes something happens, okay. Sometimes it doesn't. I'm looking around like I don't see anything. And she's like, okay, you know, sometimes something happens, okay. Sometimes it doesn't. So just then, out the corner of my eye, I thought I saw someone go by, as if someone had just walked out of the room into the hallway. So I said, Kai, is your roommate here? No. And she was like, no, why? And I was like, oh, nothing, you know, and I thought to myself, okay, my mind's just playing tricks on me now because of everything that she's told me. And she was like, you saw something, didn't you? And I was like, no, I didn't see anything. So I excused myself and tell her I need to go to her restroom. She showed me where her restroom was, down the hall. So I go down the hallway and make my way to the restroom, close the door, and flip the light on. And next thing I know, the lights go off. Right away, it freaked me out. I know that I had turned the lights on and then I turned around and they went off. But then again, I was like, okay, this could be something electrical. You know, somebody may be playing tricks on me. So I turned back around, flipped the light switch back on, turned around again. Light goes off again. And I look and the light switch is actually flipped down and I knew I had actually flipped it up. I just remember I just kept looking over my shoulder, you know, like waiting for someone to appear. And all of a sudden I hear a voice like somebody else was in the restroom with me. And that took me to a whole nother level of being freaked out. I just remember having this fear in my heart. I felt like, even though I couldn't see, that somebody was watching me. I do not like being in a position where I feel like I'm vulnerable or I can't protect myself. And obviously, if you can't see, you know, what can you do? So I went to go pull the door open. It was locked. All of a sudden, I couldn't get out of the bathroom, and I'm shaking the door.
Kai, help me, I can't get out!
I was turning the knob, jiggling the knob, and it was like it was locked. I hadn't turned the lock. I had been pulling on her bathroom door, trying to get out. It felt like a lifetime. It's like you have your back turned and you're trying to open the door and you're just waiting for someone to grab you or do something to you from behind. I definitely reached a state of panic when I could not open the bathroom door. I just felt like I needed to possibly rip this door off if I had to. And I'm yelling, Kai, come get me out of here.
I'm coming.
And I hear her coming closer to the door saying, what's wrong? What's wrong? Here I come. And,
Here.
you know, she opens the door and I was like, Kai, the door was just locked.
No, it wasn't. I just opened it. Yes, it was.
And of course, I like kind of shove her aside and I'm like going back down the hall, headed towards my purse to get my bag. And I'm like, the light was going off on me. There was something in there with me. She's like, I told you my house was haunted. And I was like, I'm getting out of here. I don't know how you can possibly even be living here knowing that you have ghosts. And next thing I know, I look over my shoulder again and I see the shadow coming down the hallway. The shadow definitely had a shape to it. It seemed like it was a person. It's like my heart stopped. It's almost like I couldn't even hardly breathe. I wasn't sure if it followed me out of the bathroom or what. It wasn't like, you know, just a big round shape. It actually was in the shape of a person and it actually went by. I said, I'm getting the heck out of here because I know now that I am seeing a ghost, that I'm not imagining things. There is a presence in the house. I'm getting chills just talking about it right now, how freaked out I was. I couldn't believe it. Of course, I get out of her house as fast as I possibly could, and she's following me outside, kind of laughing at this point, like she thought it was funny because I'm like this undefeated world champion fighter, and I'm running out of her house. It's not something I had ever experienced before, and she's trying to calm me down. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I can't believe that just happened. How do you live in this house knowing that you have a ghost? And possibly hearing us having these conversations about the house, and I'm sitting up saying, oh, you're crazy, there's no ghosts, and none of those things are happening. If this ghost that lived in the house did want her to know he was present and wanted respect, so to speak, then here I am sitting there saying, I don't believe it, that can't be true. You know, he was really for sure gonna make his presence known for me, and that's when he got me when I was in the bathroom. I had never seen a ghost. I had never encountered a ghost. So it's really hard to imagine something like that. I definitely have to say that I'm a believer, because if I don't say I'm a believer, then that would mean I'm just plain crazy, and I know that's not it.